दिल ना उम्मीद तो नहीं, नाकाम ही तो है। लंबी है गम की शाम मगर शाम ही तो है। The recent pandemic unveiled two narratives, one of death, pain, and suffering, but another of hope, compassion, where humanity transcends mutual differences, proving that we may be apart but not alone. A very good day to everyone present here. I am Mansha Ashraf, and I am glad and honored to be part of such a wonderful assembly. मैं अकेला ही चला था जानिबे मंजिल, मगर लोग साथ आते गए और कारवां बनता गया. This is exactly what led to the genesis of the Indian Conclave, an organization by and for the youth, aimed at inspiring, involving, and connecting youngsters with meaningful purposes and experiences. The 2021 third edition, Surakshit Bharat, dedicated to COVID relief. Here, may I highlight the fact that the proceeds of the Surakshit Bharat edition will be forwarded towards COVID relief. Anyone who wishes to contribute for the cause is welcome, as we strongly believe that every life matters and we together can make a difference. And we are honored and privileged to be an intrinsic part of TIC. Now, speaking of galvanizing the youth, we have yet another youth-driven organization, Nyayartha, which was conceptualized with a mission to spread neutral, informative, quality content on current affairs, especially socioeconomic, legal, and policy-oriented issues, aiming to be a leading portal at social media platforms. In a collaborative effort to provide you with indispensable information and guidance. Taking no more of your time, I would love to introduce you to our very eminent panelists. We have amongst us a member of parliament of Rajya Sabha for Andhra Pradesh. He started his political journey with the Telugu Desam Party and was an active participant in the Jai Andhra movement. Having been elected MP in 2018, he worked as a member of the House Committee, member of Committee on Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme, and member of Committee on External Affairs. Also member of Consultative Committee for the Ministry of Home Affairs. And that is not all about this compelling personality. He was also the advocate for the government of Andhra Pradesh for interstate water disputes in the Supreme Court. With immense privilege and honor, I introduce Sir Kanaka Medla Ravinder Kumar. Our next panelist is Senior Advocate Mohan Katarki. It was very recently that I came across his blog, and must I say how overwhelmed I was with the sheer unconcealed dynamism of it. Senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India, he has represented states of Karnataka, Punjab, Kerala, and Odisha in various high-profile interstate water disputes before the interstate tribunals and the Supreme Court. He has also presented papers at various national and international conferences and seminars. He is one to boldly and unapologetically stand up for his opinion. It is an absolute delight to have you join us today, sir.
Thank you.
Our next panelist, Professor Dr. Suresh V. Nadagadar, Principal and Chairman at University Law College and Department of Studies in Law, Bangalore University. Founder, Registrar and Vice Chancellor of RDPR University, Gadag, Registrar at Law University, Hubballi, as well as Registrar, Dean, and Syndicate Member of Bangalore University, a doyen of teaching fraternity. He has published several articles and research papers at national and international conferences. Specialized in labor law, he has fought for the right of laborers. We heartily welcome you, sir.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. It was in mute condition. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Our next panelist, Advocate Sridhar Prabhu, a practicing advocate at the High Court of Karnataka, Panel Council for Bar Council of India, Karnataka State Legal Services Authority, Karnataka Sanskrit University, KTDCL, and also a legal advisor to Bharatiya Kisan Sangh and Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, Indian Energy Exchange, Renewable Energy Developers Association, Karnataka. Currently serving as Government of Karnataka nominated member of Academic Council of Karnataka State Law University, he also served as the Vice Chairperson of the Energy Committee of the Federation of Karnataka Chambers of Commerce and Industries. We welcome the esteemed constellation of our star panelists for the evening. A pleasure and honor sharing the virtual space with you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I welcome all of you who have joined us today for this wonderful event and would like to hand it over to Sumuk.
Thank you, Mansha, for that eloquent introduction. As one of our illustrious founding fathers, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar rightly once said, legal aid is central to righting wrongs and rectifying injustice. Speaking of justice, one of the most important facets of governance is ensuring justice for all, and this is a fundamental principle enshrined in the Constitution of India. Article 39A of the Constitution provides for legal aid to the poor and weaker sections of the society. As we have weathered and braved a cataclysmic pandemic, which has shaken the fundamentals of our republic, it beckons us to explore how we ensure to justice of the poor and marginalized communities. As a student of law, I, along with members of the legal fraternity, strive every day to protect its natural principles so that nobody is unheard and justice is ensured. But are we really ensuring that today, when marginalized and scheduled communities are facing caste-based violence and women face domestic violence, sexual assault, and dowry harassment? How do we ensure the delivery mechanisms is effective and efficient? How do we ensure that the institutional mechanisms in place act together so that they rightly behave as sentinels of public conscience? There's nobody better to answer all these burning questions other than our erudite and intellectual panelists for doyens in their respective fields. I would like to instruct our audience to direct their questions via private chat on Zoom to Mr. Naman Wangdari. The shortlisted questions would be taken up during the question answer session at the fag end of this event. Finally, on behalf of all the members present in this august house, I would now like to ask Honorable Member of Parliament, Kanaka Medala Ravindra Kumar Garu, an essential question. Sir, how efficient is the administrative system and what are the tools which can be employed to address the situation better? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. It's an immense pleasure to interact with you, other participants. This type of event, we to all the participants and also an experience we gained. The traditional model functioning of the legal community has been dramatically turned with the advent of digital technology, post-pandemic scenario. Post-COVID-19, the walk-in clientele would prefer reaching out to freelancers over visiting medium of large law firms because of the costs. Technology has removed physical footprints. Now, with regard to the administration of justice, there is a lot of changes after post-pandemic events. And the challenges faced in India is surrounded mostly around the lack of the provisions of any acts that can govern internet policies and privacy. Additionally, the lack of knowledge amongst the professionals, inadequate training, and e-discovery are some of the other factors also. So artificial intelligence has become an integral part of a leading law firms and also in advocacies, as it offers multiple benefits to automatic work. So the verification and internal promotes of faster litigation procedures, sorting of documents based on keywords, search, shifting through years, legal data predict legal outcomes, case documentations, e-discovery process can accelerate the legal profession. Because the post-pandemic era has essentially been a boon in certain areas the legal industry, including cyber, financial, arbitration, dispute settlement, even in diverse lawyers. The family-run business may have unforeseen disputes. Debt restructuring may be adopted to overcome the financial troubles. Employer-employee disputes may arise as companies start shifting, etc. And payment defaulters. The court settlements and cyber crimes related cases are bound to such. Overall, the areas of governing cyber laws, data privacy laws are going to keep the legal industry. Multiple startups have bloomed, which may open the doors of old consultation services. The traditional firms who do not adopt the flex with ongoing trends of technology and digitalization are likely to be sidelined. The never technical and go to now the solution has to in-house diverse team with professionals from varied backgrounds, including HR, finances, forensics, in-house MBAs, doctors and engineers under the one roof.
Yes, sir.
After
So on that note, I would like to invite Senior Advocate Mohan Katarki, sir, to present his views on the same.
Yes, one more final one sentence. The difference between now, then and now, the entire human race has evolved in the virtual models of business and has invested sums in building their digital infrastructure. So this, in view of present tendencies, the administration of justice, now it became has taken different turns, and the lawyers and have to emerge in the present scenario and to run with the present technologies by adopting the recent change in the practices. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Mohan Katarki, sir, to present his views on the same.
Thank you. May I first thank you for inviting me to this session. The question of legal aid has certainly assumed huge importance during the pandemic. It was really important even before pandemic because the concept of legal aid or a right to legal aid is founded in equal justice. Article 39A as a directive principle mandates the state to provide for legal aid if a person is unable to secure justice because of the disabilities like economic or social disabilities. If we expand that concept, in the present situation of pandemic, the list of disabled persons increase. Almost every one of us are disabled. We're all locked down, almost experiencing a police state, not in any wrong sense, a police state where we're all almost in the house or at our place in this lockdown condition or semi-lockdown condition. The life, the difficulties which we face, and the lethal virus which has killed hundreds of persons, has left many kids orphan. The legal aid has assumed all importance that it deserves. We have seen during the pandemic, the people have been crying for various needs. New set of human rights have emerged. That traditionally what we thought human rights is available, of course, they're important. But in the pandemic, we have the rights such as right to online education for the kids who are seated in the house, right to food or right against hunger. The poor people who lost a job are unable to feed themselves. We have a right to treatment because in this condition today, the kind of lethality which the virus it carries, it is impossible for half the population to treat itself. Therefore, a state health services are at most important. So everyone has a right to treatment and a vaccination to protect himself from the pandemic. All these are rights, but all these rights, as I said, cannot be accessed equally unless there is a legal aid. In a right conceptualized society, the benefit which government gives are not the gratis.
Yeah.
They are not the doles of the government. They are formulated in the form of the rights. This all started after 1998 when United Nations decided to crystallize all the doles of the government into proper rights. And in India, in the last 10, 12 years, we have seen various things like right to work, right to food is being translated into an act and a right. And today, in the pandemic conditions, these rights which I enlisted, which also includes right to online settlement of dispute virtual courts, have to be crystallized. And the awareness has to be created among the public about the importance of these rights.
Yes.
The legal aid comes in various forms. Strictly speaking, is just to provide a lawyer to represent in the court. To speak in a larger sense, legal aid means provide some advices also, a pre-litigation advice to prevent the litigation. But there is a new concept, legal awareness. Today it is very important to create legal awareness among the people about their rights. In the pandemic, the kind of benefits which the government is gives, they should be made aware about those rights and how to access those rights. And much depends upon the administrative machinery which dispenses these rights or these benefits. And to go to these places, it requires a kind of a legal awareness and a legal advice, which the law students, junior advocates are really well placed to do. And I'm happy to tell you that a lot of students are doing this. If you
Yes.
go across and see on the website,
Yeah.
student networks have been created where they have been assisting the student, poor people by providing the legal assistance. The legal assistance is so important. Let me tell you, it is not only for the poor today in this pandemic situation, even the well-to-do people require it.
Yes, sir.
Other day morning, I received an important message in the morning, and it was a really shocking message that, Mohan, can you help us with some procedure to advise the clients? I said, what is the client? What is this advice? I started reading. It was shocking. Well-to-do family in South Delhi, both husband and wife died, leaving behind kids who are aged 6 and 8. The grandfather also passed away. So Corona took away 3 persons in the family wiped out. The only daughter, the sister of the father, lives in London. She flew down with great risk to her own life and has decided to take care of the children. But she wants some advice how to go about. How do I carry them to London? Because you require the visa. You require the, then she has to appoint a guardian. All these questions will
Yes.
come, or she has to adopt them in whatever capacity. Then I told them immediately that you immediately contact the district collector, who is really the guardian now in this present situation already under the statute, and he will be able to further guide
Yes,
you,
sir.
and thereafter you can approach the advocates
So
locally.
on that note, since we're talking about members of civil society and members of academia, Suresh Nadgowda, sir, since we are law students and members of the legal fraternity, what do you identify as key areas of concern, and like how should members of the civil society ensure access to justice?
Okay, thank you, Sumukh. Good evening to all respected senior panelists, Sri Ravindra Kumarji, Sri Mohan Katarki, senior advocate and distinguished visiting faculty of University Law College, Sridhar Prabhu, advocate High Court of Karnataka, and our illustrious alumni, and my dear friend Mr. Naman Vankadari, a dynamic alumni of University Law College, and all his friends. So indeed, the senior speakers have already highlighted the importance of legal aid, particularly Sri Mohan Katarki ji, not only during pandemic, even otherwise. And of course, the legal aid is made available to the poor and needy who are eligible under the provisions of Legal Services Authorities Act through various authorities established at the national, state, district, as well as taluka level. And in fact, the legal service authorities have their panel advocates through whom they will provide the legal assistance to the poor and needy. And in fact, the legal service authorities have been doing good job, as it is reported in Delhi. They have helped the old age person who was made to suffer by his children, or daughter-in-law, and all that. In fact, though it was his own house, they were not allowing him to stay comfortably, and accordingly, the Legal Services Authority panel advocates have taken up the cause, and they have secured the possession of the house and got the children, that son as well as daughter-in-law, out of the house. And similarly, they have been doing a good job to help the people who are made to work at child labor, as well as prevention of child marriages and all those things.
Yes.
And in fact, the role again, even the advocates who are really playing a very good role in providing access to justice to the particularly during this pandemic. Many public interest organizations as well as advocates have espoused the cause of the people, particularly the migrant workers who are stranded in the first COVID. And of course, the judiciary has also taken up the issue very seriously, and it has rendered a human service to the common people by taking up suo motu cognizance of the issues of or problems of the workers, migrant workers, and all that. Though under the provisions of the migrant workers law, there is a provision that it is the duty of the persons who are hiring the service of the migrant workers to provide them transportation, food, and everything. They were left high and dry, and as a result of which they were made to suffer a lot. And particularly, even in Karnataka, I must congratulate Sri Sridhar Prabhu, who has taken up the issue of the common people, particularly in Karnataka, who are badly affected due to non-availability of proper health facilities, non-availability of oxygen, beds, then the proper burial facility and all that. And he has filed a PIL, and accordingly the High Court has issued directions to the government of Karnataka, and it's really an appreciable act. And finally, we have also a rule as the law professors as well as the law students. As per the 2008 Bar Council of India rules, it is mandatory that each and every law college should have a legal clinical aid center. So unfortunately, almost in 85 to 90% of the law colleges, these legal clinical aid centers are being maintained for namesake. They are on the paper, but they are not doing anything, because we can do really a very great job, not only in providing access to legal aid, but also legal awareness, as Mohan Katarki has highlighted its importance. And indeed, some law colleges are really doing good job and helping out the people. And but still, there's a lot needs to be done in order to ameliorate the conditions of the people. And in fact, we need to have dedicated faculty. We need to allot budget for the legal clinical aid centers. Okay, and in fact, there's one more suggestion from me, that the faculty members are not permitted now to handle the cases. At least it's my advice, sincere advice, that the faculty members should be permitted to handle at least 3 legal aid cases before the Permanent Lok Adalat or any such cases, whereby the faculty will also get required practical experience. So as presently, many faculty members after LLM and PhD, they will be joining straightway their teaching profession without having any practical experience. So that's how it will not be, it is difficult for them to provide them experiential learning to the students. And thereby,
my next question is to Sridhar Prabhu, sir. So as a practicing advocate, there's a perception at large among the public that the legislations which are meant for enforcing justice are ancient and are not accommodative for, like, say, a crisis like the pandemic. So what are your views on the same? And if it is true, what legal solutions should the legislature explore that even during, like, say, a crisis like a pandemic, Domestic Violence Act is still efficient and effective?
Well, thank you. And I profusely thank you for giving this opportunity to explain my perspective on the topic. Now, first of all, let me tell you that if you take Karnataka in context, from last year, from the advent of this dreadful pandemic, there has not been a single day on which our courts have not functioned. Literally, okay. There are about 1,072 courts in Karnataka, and all courts are today functioning through the virtual mode, including the Honorable High Court of Karnataka is functioning through the virtual mode. And let me tell you, in December 2020, a mega Lok Adalat was conducted alongside the National Lok Adalat, in which a record number of 2.61 lakh cases were settled through the Lok Adalat mechanism in Karnataka. Now, the total number of cases settled through the National Lok Adalat is around 10 lakhs. Okay, and out of which around 2 to 3 lakh cases are settled in Karnataka alone. You can just gauge the penetration of this legal aid and services into the grassroots levels. Every taluka court participated in the Lok Adalat. Every district court participated in Lok Adalat, which helped resolve these 2.61 lakh cases in Karnataka alone. And 3,228 crores of compensation was disbursed across India. And let me tell you that this is unprecedented. The amount of work that our judiciary has done, in particular the legal services authorities have done across the nation, is unprecedented, unmatched by any functional democracies in the world. Now, coming to the issue of the gravity of the pandemic situation, I do admit that the vulnerable sections have been hugely impacted. Our fault lines have been exposed. The vaccination problem to oxygen problem, the very basic needs, what we call as Article 21 needs, have all been, acutely affected by the pandemic. Now, one school of thought that is emerging is that courts must take a very activist position in resolving this crisis and be passionate participants in the executive decision making. The other school of thought that is canvassed is that court must not involve in executive domain. They must step out of this domain, and it is a transgression into legislative and particularly the executive domain. Okay, so we are seeing these two schools of thought predominantly being canvassed. Now, I would say that we have to strike a golden median between the two varying school of thoughts. We must not maintain untouchability. The judiciary must not practice untouchability as to completely distance itself from the executive decision making. It must step in wherever Article 14 and Article 21 rights are affected. So that is something primary. There is no question of compromise on that. But having said that, they must not get into the day-to-day micromanagement, which is the exclusive domain of the executive. Now, my specific suggestions, what need to be done in this situation is, first suggestion is to strengthen the legal services authorities across the nation, which will be the vanguards of the legal aid and legal services to the people, the vulnerable and the needy people.
Yeah.
So, first suggestion is, please enroll more and more paralegal volunteers. There is a list of around 1,800 paralegal volunteers in Karnataka, which has to be sanitized and cleaned up. We have a database, but that database contains many advocates who have become inactive. Many may not be interested. Many may have health issues or other disabilities. So please sanitize it and have a big drive. I would say a passionate drive across the law schools and institutions to recruit people. Also go to the other sections of the society. Have a recruitment drive. Okay, that is one. Secondly, these paralegal volunteers must be utilized in the COVID relief work. Now, Delhi High Court passed an order in July 2020. See how inventive the legal services authorities have got. So they have been, these panel advocates have been appointed as authorized officers under the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act in Act of 1996 for the limited purpose of carrying out the responsibilities thereunder. They register the construction workers. So this kind of work has to be entrusted to these people. Then we must achieve a large scale reach out program for the vulnerable sections, particularly disabled, the workers, the unorganized workers, migration workers. So this is the need of the hour today. Now, having said that, I would say that the pandemic situation has brought out the activists within us. So most of us who are very busy conducting commercial litigations are now venturing into the new domains, new jurisprudence is evolving. So it's all a transitional phase. I am confident that this will be after 1 or 2 years, after all these receipts, we will have an introspection into the whole situation. The economic impact will then be more clearer. The legal impact will be more clearer. And we would be able to come out with a larger solution for the future generations to come. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. At this point, I would like to mention that Gautam Chand sir is among us. Gautam Chand sir is the member of the Karnataka State Bar Council and is also the chairman of the KSBC Academy. Thank you for coming here, sir. My next question is to Honorable MP, sir. So, as one of the wings of the democracy, as a legislature, what should be done to increase transparency and accountability in the midst of a pandemic?
This is a good question. To observe the proceedings of the legislature and the parliament and respective states of the legislature and the parliament. Due to the pandemic, COVID-19, from most probably March 23rd, 2020, a lockdown has been in the country, that the central government has taken a decision to lock down the entire country. Before that, the deliberations have taken place in the parliament. But the identity of the gravity of the pandemic at that time had not been recognized by the concerned rulers, though they have taken into the consideration of the history of the China, where the origin of this Mahammari. Due to lack of functioning and discharging the duties of the respective organizations, there is a lack of communication to the legislatures. What is to be done? What steps have to be taken? That has to be discussed. Instead of giving an opportunity before the legislation, the administration has taken an executive decision and simply informed it to the legislation, which causes a havoc in order to monitoring the pandemic situation. So I confidently say that the legislature also failed to react in the appropriate situation in order to take an appropriate decision and give suggestions to the executive in order to control the system. Pandemic situation. So the government itself has taken a decision and almost imposed, except how to conclude the sessions that was taken into consideration. But there are a lot of issues who have taken. Ultimately, the second part of the session during the pandemic, that is September or so, the Parliament has discussed with regard to the mobilization of funds and allocations to the funds. Since there is major failure on the part of the government, I cannot say this is not the forum to discuss, but it is my duty to bring it to notice of this panel discussions. There was no infrastructure in the country to attend the needs of the public, this unexpected COVID system. But public health system, mostly medicalization is privatized. So the government has to take the private into confidence and entrust this job to the private hospitals, either by taking over or by entrusting it to them. Instead of doing that, without discussing in the legislation, the government itself has taken a decision. It should be conducted only in a government hospital. That has created, because there was no infrastructure in the government missionaries to attend the needs of the people. So in a democratic countries like India, the population is more than 135 crores. It is impossible to expect that the government can do everything. The government has to realize and discuss in the respective legislatures, and work has to be distributed among the various states. And now the second stage, the central government has taken such a decision and entrusted the job to the respective state governments for federal, by virtue of this taking into consideration of federal structure in the democratic country. In such an event, the source of funds have to be allocated to the respective states. It is the duty of the central government also. The central government has taken so many schemes, but whether it is reaching to the public or not is that we have to check into.
Yes, sir.
But as Mr. Kartarki pointed out, and a lot of pell-mell is going on. Right? Take migrant workers. Even recently on 25/4 also, the Honorable Supreme Court has taken a cognizance and issued directions to attend and to prevent the damages with regard to the migrant workers are concerned, and to start the community kitchens and etc. etc. This was happened only due to the failure of the legislature and the executive. I don't hesitate to say and to admit the failure of the legislature being a legislator. See, it's a totally failure of the government and the executive and the legislature. Then the judiciary come into picture and undertaken the responsibility of the executive.
Yes, sir. So
Similarly,
on that note, I would like to ask Mohan Kartarki, sir. So
Yes, sir.
like the Supreme Court has taken a particular suo motu cognizance in the Indra Essential Supplies case. But apart from that, one thing which bothers everyone in the pandemic is that the affordability of, like, say, going to a court and ensuring justice. So what are the alternative remedies available to people so that legal aid is dispersed among every common member of the society?
Yeah, thank you. As Ravindra Kumar said, rightly, the transparency has been the biggest victim in the pandemic. When there is no transparency, when the constitutionally constituted legislatures, which are supposed to supervise the government, are not able to get an opportunity to question the government in the parliament or in the legislature due to shortage of time, whatever it is, there is no real transparency in the functioning of the government. As a result, a lot of the schemes, a lot of the benefits which the government wants to give could not be properly propagated to the people. They could not be vetted in the parliament and corrected for the common benefit of the people. For example, the Supreme Court initiated the suo motu PIL. I'm not happy that Supreme Court took this responsibility, because the state high courts have been doing this issue very effectively, depending upon the case-by-case approach. Because initiating a suo motu writ petition, trying to verify or check the government policies has a different impact. It would have been better if the matter was left to the High Court, where, depending upon the live situation, the court will redress and clarify things. But let us take this PIL in Supreme Court. At least it has helped to one extent. A transparency has been brought about what is this vaccination. We all thought that vaccines are available in the country so that everyone will be vaccinated. But if you look to the affidavit of the Government of India, which was filed on 10th of May, it has come out with its policy or its program, how to vaccinate. It is really shocking that if the suggestion of Government of India or the facts laid by the Government of India before the court are taken into consideration, it will take 16 to 18 months to vaccinate the people in India. Simple arithmetic shows that those who are above 18 age are about 93 crores in this country who require 2 doses of vaccine. That takes it to 186 crores. 25 crores are already used. That means 160 crore vaccines require. Whereas the government of India says in its own affidavit that present facility to produce vaccine in India is hardly about 8.5 crore, and it proposes to increase it by July or by September, August to about 10 crores or something, 10.5 crores altogether if you add to them. I take it, you can make it 12 crore. But where are we? We need 150 crores. Where do you get it? How long is it going to take? It is going to take another 13, 14 months.
Yeah.
With regard to the importation, government says we are trying, but it's too late to try. Where is the import? Pfizer is not waiting to sell you, nor Moderna. The foreign minister went to Washington DC, couldn't get any commitment because they're all booked now. See, all this has caused because there was no transparency in the policy making. The government thought that it is acting with the best of the interest in mind for the people. So the consultation was thought not necessary, but it was not correct. There should have been a proper consultation with the people. There should have been proper debate in the parliament. Then the things should have come out. There would have been a seriousness. There would have been a questioning. Who would have known that the government would have taken, it would have helped the government to correct itself and move forward. And if that had happened, perhaps would have not have been sitting in this bad situation today. Today, if I have to wait, if people have to wait in India for another 1 year to get fully vaccinated, I don't know what is going to happen. Yes. And this all happened because we are not able to discuss and correct ourselves. And that is all because of lack of transparency. All that I can say. And to this extent, the PIL and the Supreme Court has helped in giving us the facts which we wouldn't have fully got otherwise.
Yes. So talking about transparency, system. So if a normal citizen wants information on how things work, how should he get it? Preferably because RTI is not the rightful mechanism at this point in time.
So in fact, I'm not fully conversant with the structure of PM CARE funds. Okay, so of course RTI is one of the means thereby we can get the information. But there are criticisms, allegations that there was no need for constitution of a PM CARE, as we have already Prime Minister Relief Fund and all that. And even there are criticisms that whatever instruments, the ventilators and all those things which have been supplied with the out of the Prime Minister's PM CARE funds, so they are not actually of required standard and quality. So of course, it has to be, it should be, and of course the justification for that is that the Prime Minister Relief Fund is a constitutionally valid one, and in fact it has been audited and all. So there is a transparency, and in fact we need to make research in that how far it is transparent and all those things.
Yes, thank you. So my next question is to Sridhar Prabhu sir. So this is a question from Arohan. He believes that in your professional opinion, he asks the professional opinion of the panelist. He says, should the laws be relaxed or made stricter to better accommodate the judiciary and the citizens of the country, taking into consideration both justice and health in the country, or is it fine the way it is? Your thoughts on the same, sir?
I didn't quite comprehend what the question was. I'm sorry.
Sure, sir. I'll just repeat it. He asks, should the laws be relaxed or made stricter to better accommodate the judiciary and the citizens of the country, taking into consideration both justice and health in the country, or is it fine the way it is?
See, in my opinion, the law should get more humane during the COVID times. One important aspect that learned senior counsel, Mr. Mohan Katarki said, we are now in an executive Raj. So most of the legislations that were passed, if you take the legislations that were passed in the year 2020, the first round of COVID situation, 7 of the entire legal regime. followed by that, and National Disaster Management Authority passed the executive orders which are today reigning the field. Those are the laws today. Legislature never ever had an opportunity to legislate at all. The biggest toll that the COVID has taken is on the legislature. Legislature has never debated the laws, nor has tested it on the anvil of the people's will. Okay, the legislative today is the weakest of the organs and most vulnerable of all the organs during this process. So one is the strength, one need is to strengthen the legislature to the utmost extent, because we as a functional democracy must empower legislature, which is supreme today. Okay, now executive must not decide every aspect of our lives, even the liberty related laws, even our personal movements, everything is today executive controlled. Okay, that too, the unelected executive, not the political executive that is elected, not even the Council of Ministers. It is the IAS officers, police officers, DGPs who are deciding what the laws must be, under what laws we must be regulated. Okay, this is one primary aspect. Secondly, we have seen police atrocities, inhuman acts that are perpetrated. I am not for a moment saying police are not under pressure. They have given, many police personnel have laid down their lives for to safeguard our interest, to safeguard us from the advent of, from the onslaught of COVID. But having said that, once you give unparalleled power to the executive, it is bound to happen. It is bound to happen. The police are bound to exercise the powers that they are exercising on the streets. So one, the laws must get more humane, more radical, more intelligent, I would say, rather than evolving radical solutions, stricter solutions to the COVID situation. We must find humane solutions, but at the same time, we must not allow whimsical tweaking of the laws at every level. Now, what we have seen over the last 15-20 days is that every district collector is given the responsibility to tweak these executive orders the way he can. One collector says 8 to 10, one collector says 6 to 8, one collector says 6 to, this kind of regime, arbitrary regime, is under progress. So this must be, instead of bypassing the legislative mandate and circumventing the whole thing and directly connecting the lower rung of the executive with the highest rung of the executive, we must evolve more participative forms of executive decision making. And I would recollect finally Lord Sumption said, this is what learned senior advocate Arvind Datar recently wrote. He said litigation is not a, he quoted Lord Sumption saying, litigation is not a consultative and participative process. But those were the times, those were colonial times, those were imperial times. Now the litigation should be more consultative and participative. At the same time, legislature must be strengthened. We must have more legislative sessions, more people's answerability, accountability in place. That is the need of the hour today.
Thank you, sir. Coming to the last round of questions, my next question is to Honorable MP, sir. So as a member of the Rajya Sabha, which basically bridges the ideal of federalism in the constitution, how do you expect the center and the states to work together? Because we daily see allegations from various chief ministers saying we do not want to apply a tender, you're not given certain freedoms and etc. So how ideally do you pose that with a union of 28 states? How should the union function with the states?
Very good, a pertinent question. Because the spirit of the constitution is has to be taken into consideration, as it's a federal state. The union is expected to take the confidence of the all legislative respective states. As Mr. Sridhar Prabhu has pointed out, that legislature have not been taken into confidence. They are simply giving an executive orders. It is redundant to say that a district collector issued guidelines, lockdown guidelines, and the police is implementing, as if it's not the implementing the lockdown rules under Disaster Management Act. They are framing the rules their own to execute their own power and to vindict the public and to harass the public and without any, propaganda, without any, advertisement to the public in respect of the implementations of the rules to be imposed, rather imposed. The question is, federal states, the states have got its own mechanism. You know, there is a state list, central list, and concurrent lists are there with regard to the maintenance of health and the maintenance of law and order. And it has to be coordinated by the union. In the first part of COVID, the first wave of the COVID, the central government has taken a decision unilaterally by the Prime Minister himself, and a lockdown has been imposed without giving any time. That's why the migrant workers problem has erupted. And the courts are forced to, because several people have lost their lives. It has caused a lot of mental agony, even if it is remembered. But similarly, states also forced to implement that lockdown. Okay, whether that is good or bad, it's not a debate to be discussed. But whereas the second part of COVID is concerned, the second wave of COVID is concerned, center did not intervene except giving an instructions to the states, stating that you can impose lockdowns if necessary, you do the right, that you do that, you do that. Imposing guidelines, there may not be any restrictions to the intrastate movements. Now the states are imposing lockdown, and also intrastate movements also restricted. Their guidelines issued by the central government is also protected. But the question is, entrusting the job to the respective state governments during the second wave of COVID, is it not the duty of the central government to provide respective, funds, sufficient funds? Because there was no pre-planned, despite of the ICMR and other experts with regard to the ensuing second wave is concerned. But the central government did not initiate, and no legislative debate was going on, taken place. And similarly, legislation also not taken place. By virtue of the guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Home Affairs, the states are functioning, state executive is functioning, and without any funds. We have seen a lot of cases due to lack of oxygen. Several people lost their lives. And several people was, private hospitals, they used to charge lakhs of rupees per patient, single patient. And there is no mechanism at all to monitor it. Central government washed up their hands. It's not a criticism. It's not a political debate. But the agony causes the irresponsible attitude of the union government, wash up their hands, entrusting the job to the states as if it is a federal structure. Under the state governments wash up their hands, the center did not supply the vaccine. It has to be placed 135 crores of the people, population is there. It is not the duty of the government to organize and to distribute the respective, states with regard to the vaccination. The only solution to prevent this this pandemic is vaccination. There is no other treatment. If that was the case, it is not the duty of the union to coordinate with the states and distribute the sufficient. Instead of distributing the vaccine, the union government has made an attempt and advised the pharmaceutical industries to export it. Yes, it is done. So due to lack of vision, due to lack of not taking the confidence of the legislature into confidence, without any coordination, some officers, executive has taken a decision and implemented. That's why there is a huge problems are there between the state and centers, and a political dimension also has taken place unfortunately, that I'm not supposed to make a mention, but I was forced to mention. Unless this type of problems is being solved, the states also may not implement in a proper perspective. And also distribution of funds are also very much required.
Yes.
The PM care funds also there, and there are several funds used are allocated for this purpose. We do not know what happened to that. But it is the duty of the governments and the respect to some of the state governments have taken advantage of it to throwing the blame on the center, and the center used to throw the blame on the state. Ultimately, the life of the public became miserable.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. My next question is to Mohan Katarki, sir. So I'm taking a cue from your earlier points. So you talked about as to how the high courts were ably dealing with the supplies and etc. And the Supreme Court stepped ahead when it took the suo motu cognizance of the case. Since there's a set hierarchy of the courts, how do you see, the different levels of the judiciary working in synchrony together? So what are your views on how an ideal judiciary should function?
Well, we have been discussing this relationship between the Supreme Court and the High Court writ powers. This is an old debate that whether the Supreme Court should intervene under Article 32 or should be left to the High Courts at the Court of First Instance to entertain writ petitions under 22 to 226 effectively and deal with the situation. And Supreme Court can intervene only by way of a special petition if there is a question of law or something, a perversity involved. But Article 32 does confer a power on the Supreme Court in extraordinary circumstances to intervene. The High Courts in this matter, pandemic, having regard to the local situations, having regard to the case-by-case approach as where the injustices occurred, has been doing the duty of correcting the injustice with a specific remedy, right? The Supreme Court initiated the PIL without there being a specific cause, but by stating that they would like to oversee the anomalies in the implementation of several policies relating to the COVID. Fine. But here comes the supervision of the executive policy making without there being a cause to supervise. It is like a post hoc check of the executive policy, which is sometimes not desirable. That's what we said. Let the High Court, they should have left the High Court to do it as the case come before it. And they have been doing good job, no doubt about it. The way the Delhi High Court spent nearly 2 weeks in trying to ensure oxygen supply, the way Bombay High Court did, the way Madras High Court did. Karnataka High Court, of course, is one of the best High Court. It has been an excellent job. Sridhar will also for that. But whatever it is now, the Supreme Court has taken the responsibility, and as I said, now we'll have to hope for the best in the Supreme Court. And one thing that has happened is at least the vaccination policy has been laid before the people. The debate has started on that, what went wrong and how to correct it. Now, what went wrong and what has to be done for the wrong to be a separate matter. That is a political issue. We are only concerned with now how do we correct it. So if you need about 150 crore vaccines immediately, and our production capacity is not more than 10 crores per month, and which can be enhanced to at the most to 15 crores, 12 crores, affidavit says, I take it as 15 crores. Then we are nowhere still because that takes about 10 months. And it is impossible really to make the people wait till then. It is impossible to expect people to have patience. It is impossible to tell the people that you cannot be vaccinated, whereas some people in the cities are vaccinated. This might lead to a serious social unrest. I don't know how the government will face it. Friends like Ravindra Kumar can better explain this, how to contain this social revolt, which might take place if people are not vaccinated before September, October, or something like that. I really don't understand. Today morning, somebody sent me a video, how the social revolt is taking place in China, which is basically a real police state. But and there also I saw in the video that some people attacking the police. But in India, I need not tell you, if such a kind of a social revolt were to take place, it is very difficult to control it. It is difficult to contain it. Therefore, we are heading for really a bad time. But we will let us all hope and trust that the civil society, the government, state, and the center will finally be able to handle it and ensure peace in the public and also protect the health of the people by giving a right vaccination and putting the country back on the rails.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So since you talk about a social revolt and as to how vaccination is necessary at this point in time, which everyone agrees, I would like to ask one thing. So one argument made by these private companies is that we spent millions and millions in getting these formulas, so we have a patent across it. So this question is to the entire panel. So it's open for anyone to answer. So what should be done? Like, should the state prioritize patent laws at this point in time, or should the state say that no, look, the formula should be allowed to every institution possible which can manufacture a vaccine, so that more people can get vaccinated sooner? So what are your positions on this?
Yeah, see, as far as vaccination, this patent is concerned, there's some misconception.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, nobody is enforcing the patent rights, at least with regard to the vaccines are concerned. With regard to the drugs, it's a different matter. The Moderna, about 8 months back, said, I am ready to give license to anyone who wants to manufacture the patent. I waive it. But nobody went to it. AstraZeneca has given a license to the serum almost free. If somebody else had gone to the AstraZeneca and asked for license, they would have given. As far as the Bharat Biotech is concerned, it was developed by the ICMR, that is the government agency. It could have also given to anyone who wants it. The main handicap in developing the vaccine is not a patent at this stage. Maybe it may become after some time, but at this stage, it is not. At this stage, the main problem is the fund and the infrastructure and the certain raw materials. I'm told particularly the raw materials are available only in the United States of America, which requires to be imported and which requires a lot of fund. Unfortunately, there was no investment in India for whatever the reason. Maybe they thought that it is not necessary or whatever it is, that politically Mr. Ravindra Kumar and others will have to ask questions and be satisfied whether government was right in believing that it is not necessary, or they really committed a blunder in believing that it is not necessary. But the thing is this, that the vaccinations are, the development of vaccination is not really affected by the patent at this stage. And the real problem is the infrastructure, facility, and the investment of money into that. We must thank Mr. Serum Institute that he invested money entirely out of his pocket and provided vaccines to Indians. Even Bharat Biotech has done its job entirely on its own, though it has some support of the government, but not much actually when you really look into that. So what is required is investment. Some more companies like Tata's or Infosys, which have a lot of money in, particularly in Bangalore IT sector, they should create a fund and invest and start manufacturing vaccines at the earliest. Even then it may take 6 months, but at least we should do it and hope that by December, at least, if not September, we should be able to vaccinate our people. Otherwise, I don't know. I can only say best wishes to the government to handle the situation as it comes.
Yes, sir.
So please, one thing I don't know, in fact, it is a question for many in the country, why this differential pricing for the state and the center? So there is no answer, because many have been asking this to the government, but there is no proper answer for this. If any panelist can throw light on this, I think it will be better.
Well,
This differential pricing, sorry, I'm sorry, you want to say something? Sir, you please go ahead. Ravindra Kumar.
One aspect I want to
Let
highlight
Mr.
was
Sridhar go on.
that in October 2020, India and South Africa, on the date of holy occasion of Mahatma Gandhi Jayanti, India and South Africa mooted an idea of patent-free regime for the vaccination. This was an initiative taken by India in the United Nations. Okay, so same has to be replicated in the domestic regime. One. Secondly, what we see in the vaccination is it is available in the private hands now in a big number, and very corporate, urban-centric, large hospital chains have access to vaccination now. The small next-door hospitals, clinics, and PHCs do not have access to vaccines. This is one big divide, vaccine divide, as we may call it, like digital divide is happening. Okay, on the pricing, he's very right. Dr. Nadgowda is very right that the pricing has to be explained. Now, my demand, if I may say, is this. please come out with the maximum detailed price for this vaccination. Also, come out with the production cost. See, we have a National Pharma Pricing Authority, which can go into the costing of these vaccines. I am not saying for a moment that investment on return should not be given. This is a very much necessary. You know, they have invested money, there are stakes involved, so they must be given their legitimate due. But at the same time, the vaccine producers must come out on the production cost. If not, the National Pharma Pricing Authority or drug controller, whoever is the competent authority, must go into the actual production cost and then fix a regulated price for these vaccinations, as was done in the case of remdesivir, though in the very late phase. Okay. Then finally, unless you create a universal vaccination, free vaccination program, like you did for other diseases, like polio, etc., you can't achieve the target. You can't make it very urban centric. You can't make it very centralized. You can't have one portal which will manage. So this must be made more decentralized, more consultative, and more affordable to all sections.
Yes, sir. MP sir,
Because
you
with
wanted
regard
to
to
say
the
something? Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
So, with regard to the vaccination is concerned, with respect of the price fixed by the private and government between the candidates, the government has to take this step. It is a need of the hour. The government has to take entire control over the production. All, either import or country production, Bharat Biotech or Serum, whatever, and imposed, unless the government has to take the entire production and pay the price to the company. And the government has to provide all free vaccination to the all public. There are so many huge funds are coming. Several organizations, several public industrialists are also donating to the nation. Even Tata also declared, due to for the purpose of the state, public, I will prepare to donate entire my property. May true or may not be true. But the question is, if the government is coming forward to take up the entire production and to take steps to major production, because according to my knowledge, Bharat Biotech has made a request to open a center in Pune and a closer pharmaceutical industries to be provided for the purpose of further production in Maharashtra. Till now, that application has not been considered by the government, whatever the reasons may be. Likewise, transfer of formula is not the criteria here. The production and other infrastructure is very much. Next, providing funds and to centralize the production and vaccination. It cannot be a discretion of, it cannot be thrown away, a discretion of private hospitals, government hospitals, online. The vaccination should be vaccinated, all the people free of cost by the government by providing the government funds. It is for the government how to secure the funds. Definitely respective states has to purchase it. Instead of purchasing, they can contribute their share to the central government or whatever it may be. It is between the state and the center. But ultimately, free vaccination has to be given. All production of vaccine has to be taken into control by the central. Then only it is possible. Unless it is being done, it is impossible to get vaccination to complete within the specified period.
Yes, sir.
One is lack of production and lack of coordination by the central government.
Okay, just a small submission. Ravindra Kumar sir, it is not a difference in pricing between the government and the private. It is between central government and the state governments. Being in the same country, why there should be such a difference?
True.
Even that has created a lot of inconvenience and confusion among the state governments. And they should have, in fact, fixed the same price for the whole country and allowed the state governments to purchase. So they would have started the vaccination program long back.
Yes, I agree. I agree with Mr. Suresh.
Sir MP, sir, there's also a question to you. There's also a question which says, which is related to this question. It says, if there is regulatory pricing, the corporates might get affected and they'll not invest in India. So can you club both the questions and answer it?
Pardon? Please.
Sure, sir, sure. If there is regulatory pricing, the corporates might get affected and they will not invest in India.
No. As far as that with regard, it consider involves it's mixed questions. The question is, first we have to see the production cost. As pointed out by Mr. Katarki, as a raw material, you have to import it. There is no raw material at all. And other infrastructures are also not there. Then formula is not the main consideration to transfer it, and nobody is claiming about the patent right at this stage. And the contra, the government can take it to the control over the production and entrust the job to the pharmaceutical industries to do a particular production to the maximum extent. Full utilization of the company and maximum extent of various units. They are intended to start, to my knowledge, Bharat Biotech intend to start 6 units all over the country, all parts of the country. But still, it has not been taken place. But the reason behind it, they are not able, the government is also not able to provide funds to them. And Bharat Biotech on its own funds, Serum Institute has its own funds, and we are not able to import the medicine, vaccination from the US and even Russia, and we're not able to do that. If that is so, the only options, the government has mobilized huge crores of funds. For example, one example I will give. MP Lord's funds we are having for each 5,000 crores per annum. There are almost 750 MPs are there all over the country. And they have, the government cancelled the funds for 2 years. And 10 crores for, the huge funds are already taken. Like that, several organizations donated. And PMRI, Prime Minister Care Funds also, they are contributed huge crores of funds. There are no accounts, there are no allegations as pointed out by Mr. Suresh. If all the funds are put together, the transparency is required. Unless the transparency is there, it is impossible to implement it. Central government, even if the state governments are prepared to purchase it, irrespective of the price, then the respective state governments has to contribute the funds, and vaccination has to be taken to be control, overall control. Because suppose if the state, Andhra Pradesh is concerned, they are not in a position the government allocate the funds from their budget. Telangana is concerned, they are able to get funds. Because due to the lack of the allocation of funds by the respective state, it doesn't mean that the people of the Andhra Pradesh have been thrown into street as a destitutes. So it is not like that. So it is for the center to coordinate it and take the control and fix the price, control the production, and to see maximum production has to be utilized. That has to be taken control. This is the only solution for the vaccination. And that too, 135 crores of people are there.
Yes, sir.
It will take at least 2 years.
Yes, I'd like to pass on the baton to Mohan Katarki, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree with Ravindra Kumar and others that there should have been a universal vaccination, and ideal situation is that everyone in India should have got it free. But I don't know why it didn't happen, and it wouldn't have cost much to the government. Even at the rate of 200 to 250 rupees, if government had vaccinated the entire 135 crore population with the 260 crore vaccines doses, it would have cost you about 50,000 crore rupees. That's not a big amount actually in this pandemic situation, particularly when the government of India has a central bank at its disposal and it can run the deficit budget. And in fact, it has been running at the rate of 3% of the GDP. If it would have been more, it makes no difference. But at the same time also, I do not find much fault in this differential pricing prima facie. The center is selling it at the rate of 250 rupees or something, and the states are 650 rupees. That's not really a serious problem. Only thing is that the government must make it clear, as far as the poor are concerned, those who are in the BPL and the lower middle class, they must get it free. And those who can afford should be able to pay for it. And they would have paid, in fact, those who can afford it. But at the moment, government has been giving it at a subsidized price. It's okay. The main concern is not the price again. Main concern is the production. How to ramp up the production We have to again and again seriously think. We can't just deceive ourselves by saying production will improve. It will not improve. At the moment, data which is available within the public domain shows that vaccination is not going to be less than 12 months minimum, or it may go to 16 months or 18 months. I don't know. And at this rate, I already said that if you pass September, if you cannot vaccinate people, there will be a social revolt. And to contain that social unrest, social problem, the revolt or the whatever the people want to say, it's very difficult for the government. Therefore, all efforts should be made to ramp up the vaccines wherever import possible, whichever country. Don't stand on any prestige, get it, and pay any price, get it. That is the most important for the government.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, small clarification. Just one thing we don't understand, why there should be such a difference in the prices. If whether it is purchased by central government or the state government, whatever they do, it is for the public. Why there should be such difference? So for the central government, they are saying it is 300. For states, it is 600. Basically, we don't understand the why that differential pricing.
I'll tell you why difference is. The Bharat Biotech and as well as the Serum are willing to give to the center at a lesser rate because center has given some money. The recently center has given some fund of 4,000 crore to Serum, and couple of crores also it has given to the Bharat Biotech. And in fact, Bharat Biotech is also the beneficiary of the technology and transferred by the center. So for this reason, the center gets at a subsidized rate. The states are to buy at a higher price, so that overall the manufacturer makes his profit a reasonable profit. That's the point kept in mind.
Still
the reason doesn't appear to be justified.
Yes, Sridhar Prabhu.
Well, this is the matter. Somebody has to get into the arithmetics and economics. At the moment, nothing is available in public domain. Yeah. Broadly, I can say that 600 and 250 is not much problem. My first problem is get me the vaccine.
No,
yes.
that is
Yes, sir.
That's why I have suggested, instead of selling these vaccines to the state, the center has to take under universal control.
Yes, it could have taken. It could have.
Sridhar Prabhu, sir. Yes, sir.
Suggestion that has come from various high courts is why we are not exploring the compulsory license route under the Patents Act. This is one. And secondly, as Dr. Nadgowda said, I completely agree with him. Whether the union has funded you or whether you have some special consideration towards, it is the same state. Article 12, both state governments and central government are not different in that sense, though they are different legal personalities. It is the same sovereign state which is manifest as a provincial government at the provincial levels. That is one. Second anomaly which we are not able to notice is that the central government has taken a decision to allow the states to compete in the international arena for vaccination, which is not correct in my humble opinion. See, in a deficit regime, more buyers add on to the proposition, it leads to a cartelization or hiking of prices. So you have more people competing to buy. You see, then what you will see is that you will sell to Maharashtra at a higher rate and to Sikkim at a lower rate. I mean, I'm just giving this example. So each state will get vaccination from the foreign countries at the cost of its own bargaining power. That is one. And many vaccine manufacturers are not ready today to deal with these state governments. They say, I deal only with the union government. So this anomaly we are not able to notice. So these issues have to be addressed on a war footing basis. What the least that a citizen expects today is to explain to us as to what is transpiring in the minds of the government. What Dr. Nadgowda says may not be correct. I mean, there may be some reason, as Mohan Katarki sir is saying, there must be some reason why it is being sold at a higher cost. We need to know what is this calculus about, what is causing the minds of the policymakers. That is the most haunted question that common man has today. And finally, regarding the bidding process, that international bidding process that we are talking about, in a deficit regime, bidding always shoots up the prices. This is elementary economics. You see, you conduct bidding in a deficit scenario, the prices are going to jack up. Because nobody will come forward to sell. Nobody will reduce the prices just because the more number of bidders, the prices will be higher.
Yes. And anyone would like to share their views with what was Sridhar Prabhu sir said, or any new points regarding the same?
Sridhar is an authority. He has really done a lot of work. We are all talking hypothetically. Sridhar and Ravindra Rao are in the forefront, and
it is a wrong impression.
we can't challenge them. In fact, we learn a lot from both of them.
No, sir. Now the courts are more active.
No, we are expressing the views of the layman.
Yes.
Yeah,
At the end, we're all winners.
As the layman, yeah.
So my last question is to Suresh Nadagowda, sir. Sir, as a head of one of the foremost law colleges in the country, like you touched upon the fact that as to how every college has to have a legal cell and etc. So how should we improve upon this? So let's assume that there are around 10,000 law colleges in India. So how do we ensure that legal cells becomes a mandatory practice in the near future? And how should we train a law student to become, like say, a quest for justice even before he graduates? So how do you see this?
Okay, a very pertinent question. First of all, we don't have 10,000 law colleges. We have 1,400 law colleges now. And in fact, as per the 2008 regulations of the Bar Council of India, new regulations, it is made mandatory that each and every law college should have a legal aid clinic. Okay, and it should be active. But for the sake of compliance and to show to the Bar Council or any other affiliate visiting the regulating authority, so they have put the board and of course devoted a room whenever the Bar Council or any regulating body visits them, but actually not that serious in conducting the activities. So in fact, I would like to quote, much before coming into effect of these rules, as I know, in University Law College, Dharwad, I think when Sri Mohan Katarki was the student there, so they formed a student association and they represented the grievances of unorganized, daily wage employees issue
And
in the Supreme Court.
capitation
Issue, and they got the relief from the Supreme Court. So of course, now we have a provision under the law. We have to make the legal aid clinics to function very effectively. We should devote the faculty, and of course there is a the scarcity of faculty in many government-run institutions and all that. Of course, in private, except the few private universities and the national law schools, we need to have a devoted faculty, for dedicated faculty, and whatever the hours we spend for legal aid activity, which should be considered as part of our workload in addition to the regular teaching workload. And we should make it as a compulsory mandatory paper of 3 to 4 credit, and it should earn some marks for that. We should allot some marks so that the students also will take active interest and involve fully in that. And it is not making an annual ritual of conducting legal aid literacy in one or the other village once in a year. It should be every weekend or once in 15 days. We should visit the village, nearby village, try to do some research, survey, get to know about the cases and all that, and try to provide them legal consultancy, legal aid. That's what I also suggested, that the faculty and the students, particularly in the final year, should be allowed to represent such poor and needy in the free legal aid cases before the permanent lok adalat or even before the courts. So that will help and go a long way in making these legal clinics more vibrant and functional.
I have three specific suggestions rather on this. One, first of all, if the college is not serious about legal aid clinics, then we must de-recognize it. I'm making a very radical suggestion that if it should be constantly monitored, and it should be brought to the notice of the authorities that whether legal cell is functioning or not. We must take the decision of de-recognizing, because it is one of the conditions for affiliation with the Bar Council and the university as per the Bar Council norms. This is one. Secondly, we must ensure that Honorable Chief Justice of Karnataka, Justice Oak, suggested to the Vice Chancellor of KSLU once that you prepare a syllabus for legal services as a domain, as a subject, and start a certification course. So KSLU is the first university in India today to have started a course on legal services. In the entire country, we have a full-fledged 6-month certification course, which methodically teaches you about the legal aid and services. Okay, so this should be done in all universities and legal institutions on a compulsory basis. Third, most importantly, when we talk about the legal aid in the practical scenario, when a lawyer, you expect a lawyer of Mr. Mohan Katarki's eminence to be part of the legal aid process. Okay, you must pay him as per the industry norms. I am not saying exactly what, her appearance should be in so many. I am not saying it should be mathematical equivalent of what he deserves, but it must be a respectable amount. Therefore, the state must endeavor to cross-subsidize this, like we do in electricity sector, where we give free power to the farmer, but at the same time, the government pays the entire cost of supply to the distribution company. There is nothing free, somebody pays for it. So therefore, state must adopt a cross-subsidy model to get best of the legal equipment to assist the legal aid clinics and legal aid programs. And the faculty must be trained. We see that faculty training is also most important. Trainers must be trained. There must be master classes for the faculty members, and it should be done in a professional manner. This law or this school of this one has not evolved much in India. There is a greater need to invest intellectual investment and also resources into this domain.
Okay, I wish to know from Sri Sridhar Prabhu that you told KSLU has introduced a certificate course on legal services and all. But since it is not mandatory, many will not opt for it. It should be made as part of the curriculum, mandatory. Then and it should carry some credits. So when it carries some marks, then only students will take it seriously, and we can devote a faculty for that.
Yes. It should be made as a part and parcel of the regular course syllabus.
Yeah. Every 15 days they should visit the village and make a survey, try to identify the problems of the people, try to resolve whether through ADR or through legal Lok Adalat like.
As an aside, keeping it as a side activity, we must integrate it into the curriculum itself, making it compulsory for the students to be part of this.
You can make a suggestion to that effect to Bar Council, as you are there as a council.
Sure.
One more suggestion. With regard to the legal aid is concerned, it cannot be confined to a particular educational institutions or the students. It has to be taken by the every professional. The bar councils have to take steps that may be taken into consideration. One of the condition precedent to undertake some cases that has to be taken note of. I was a member of Bar Council for 12 years also, but I know that the present scenario, I am not in a position to engage Mr. Mohan Katarki by investing funds as for example, they take it. So, but recently, yesterday I came to know one of the High Court from Tamil Nadu or so, I don't know, I am subject to correction. While conferring the senior designation, a condition has been imposed, at least a minimum 10 cases has to be, legal aid cases have to be taken per annum.
Yeah, the Punjab High Court.
Yesterday I came to know that was on.
Correct. Punjab and Haryana High Court done it.
Maybe.
Good.
We come across in social media, but I don't know exactly it is subject to correction. That is,
it is true.
Sir?
It is true.
Maybe. That is one of the conditions can be taken and maybe imposed. And it's definitely we can render service as a part of advocates. Though being a senior advocate, though I was designated in 2012, but I am not able to attend by virtue of my political assignments and other reasons, whatever the reasons may be. So I mean, majority, the understanding of the public, the common notion of the public, we may not approach the Supreme Court. I can't engage the senior lawyers in Supreme Court. Unless senior lawyers are being engaged, we may not get fruitful result. But
in fact, the Honorable Chief Justice of Punjab, Haryana High Court, Justice Muralidhar, has written a beautiful book on legal aid. One of the classics, I would say, on legal aid. So this book must be made as a textbook for all the students across the universities. And as Dr. Nadgaonkar said, it must be a compulsory subject, not an elective nor a certification course. Then only we can expect some academic investment into this.
I agree with all the suggestion. Firstly, as Nadgaonkar said, that it should be a compulsory subject in the law schools. Secondly, as Ravindra Kumar says, that it should be made a condition of designation. Yesterday itself, the Punjab Haryana High Court has designated 19 lawyers as senior advocates, and the notification I checked up little before joining this meeting, that there is indeed a condition imposed by the High Court that each senior advocate designated will handle 10 pro bono cases in a year. Whether such a condition can be imposed or not, one may debate. According to me, I think it is a reasonable condition which they have imposed, because every lawyer is under duty to provide legal aid to the clients. That is a professional duty. If it is a professional duty, while conferring a designation, certainly the High Court or Supreme Court under Section 16(2) of the Advocates Act can impose such a condition. Right. Thirdly, I want to clarify one thing, that legal aid has two parts. One is legal awareness and the legal advice and legal representation. As far as the legal awareness is concerned, which I think the students of law can take it more seriously, they can create a lot of legal awareness and learn themselves by going to villages, slums, and various kind of places, wherever the law and people interact. As far as the other two things are concerned, that is legal advice and representation is concerned, that is something of the way a state has to make an investment. As Sridhar said, that it has to be a cross subsidy by the state, as it happens in England and all. We have seen it, huge amount of money is spent. If the government can employ every year about 1,000 lawyers in one state like Karnataka and pay about 20,000 rupees as a fee to them fix, and deploy them around the state in various district courts, trial courts, high courts, at various places, certainly they'll be able to learn themselves and help the poor litigants with adequate legal knowledge and the representation in the court where necessary. So that kind of a system should be introduced, but that really calls for a budgetary allocation, which may run into more than almost 10,000 crores at the central level, but that has to be done. So far, we have been looking at the justice as a more ornamental sector in the government. It was not considered to be productive. In fact, it was not a part of the planned expenditure. Now it is a part of the planned expenditure. And once it's a part of the planned expenditure, funds should be available. And once, if that happens, I'm sure the legal aid can get a boost. It is required in India.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, sir. That brings
one
us
more
to
session, one final
Yes,
session.
Sure, sir.
With regard to the subordinate courts are concerned, because legal aid is very much needed in subordinate court than High Court and Supreme Court. That's the need of the hour, because most of the litigant public may not ventilate their grievances before the subordinate courts also. The major, because direct access to the client, like criminal cases and other civil cases are concerned, the subordinate courts are playing a key role in it. So the Bar Council has also seriously, consider about the legal aid is concerned while at the time of enrollment. But maybe during apprenticeship, mere enrollment is not sufficient to assist the lawyer, and even during the professional career, he has to undertake certain cases of legal aid cases, etc. Usually now the subordinate courts are, the respective judicial officers are appointing legal aid to the where the accused are not able to engage a lawyer. That may be a condition precedent, but it's not working out. But the question is, even subordinate courts, in subordinate court also, a lawyer in a particular years, he has to undertake some, attend and conduct so many cases, etc. That condition also to be considered by the respective bar councils.
Okay, in furtherance of the views expressed by senior panelists, so I have one last suggestion to go on the line of analogy of the High Court, Punjab or some High Court, which has made it mandatory for the advocates to handle minimum 10 legal aid cases. Even such a condition should be imposed on the law colleges in a cycle of 3 years or 5 years, during which the Bar Council will come for inspection. So each legal aid center should have done this much of legal awareness programs and legal aid programs and all that. So that I think that will also help to streamline the things and make them more active.
Yes.
And even it can be attached to the promotions or even annual increment of the teachers, so that teachers also will take interest in that.
One suggestion to a private university is that open the legal aid center outside the college. What we prominently see is every college has a cell or a room inside its premises where nobody can access. You will have the satisfaction of creating a room, but nobody will access. The utility is not served. So we can adopt a village or adopt a taluka in which these legal aid programs can be conducted. So each college, ASLU, I will move this idea as an academic council member, also as a council of bar council, to the respective entities to say that adopt one taluka, adopt one village, each college adopts a village, and then they show some tangible result, as Dr. said, that unless you show a tangible result, somebody certifies it, some competent authority certifies it. It is not self-certification. Somebody must certify it, and then only its accreditation must be continued. Yes. That can be, I think, one of the important interventions.
Yes. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this discussion. I'd like to thank each and every panelist. I can't express in words as to the amount of knowledge which has been shared by each and every one. I'm pretty sure everyone who participated in this discussion learned a thing or two. For now, I would like to give the vote of thanks to Naman.
Naman, Sumukh, before vote of thanks, I would like to thank and acknowledge the gracious presence of my esteemed colleague, Professor V. Sudesh, for being with us throughout the discussions, and also for being a support to his colleague, myself. And in fact, I did not notice it earlier, and now I am seeing him on the screen. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
As we have come to the end of the panel discussion on access to legal aid during the time of COVID-19, it gives me immense pleasure to propose the vote of thanks. Good evening all, I am Ayappa. A Malayan proverb goes this way: the debt of gold can be cleared, but one lives in debt to those who are kind. The Indian Conclave family owes an enormous debt of gratitude to all the chief guests of today's event. On behalf of TIC, I would like to thank Kanaka Mandela Ravindra Kumar Sir, Honorable MP, for taking time despite of his busy schedule and speaking to young budding minds. Thank you, sir. I'd also like to thank Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, Mohan Katarki sir, for taking time and highlighting about the morals and ethics during this COVID crisis to the youngsters. I'd also like to thank Professor Dr. Suresh V. Nadagowda, Principal of University Law College, Dean, for taking time and speaking on the panel discussion about the legal aid during the time of COVID-19. I'd also like to thank advocates of Karnataka High Court, Sridhar Prabhu sir, for taking time and speaking to young minds. Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank Sumukh Biram for meticulously moderating this panel discussion. Thank you, Sumukh. I'd also like to make a special mention of SF Gautam Chand, Karnataka State Bar Council Academy Chairman and member, for taking time and being present throughout this event. I'd also like to thank Professor Dr. V. Sudesh, former Principal of University Law College, Dean and Chairman, for taking time and being throughout this panel discussion. I'd also like to thank Anjana Reddy, Principal of RV College of Law, for being in this event. Thank you, ma'am. I'd also like to thank all the volunteers and the chief and the other directors of the Indian Conclave for being present throughout the event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayappa.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we come to the end of the program. Thank you very much for staying connected with us. For more details, please visit www.theindianconclave.com. That talks much about our organization and all that we do. the next weekend, we are simulating the Youth Parliament Conference. And for also we are also simulating a model UN committee, that is the United Nations Human Rights Committee. All the registration fee that you pay shall go as the COVID fund relief. And this is a donation drive, fund relief drive. So a fundraiser initiative, I would like to call it as. Thank you very much for joining us and supporting us. Have a good day. Have a great weekend. In fact, it is a blessing of the highest order to witness such a debate of such eminent scholars and such eminent people in their respective fields. Thank you very much, one and all. Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
The volunteers and interns are requested to stay back. Hello. Sumuk, are you here? Sai Gokul, did we add them to the breakout room?
Sir? Yeah, to whom, sir?
Everyone left.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
sure.